What happens when wonder outruns proof? Every age tells stories about minds that wandered too close to the edge of what could be measured. In candlelit observatories, in university basements, in laboratories humming after midnight, the same image returns. A scientist alone with a question that refuses to stay small. The original accounts gathered here speak of 10 researchers said to have vanished after discoveries that seem to bend the limits of physics, biology, memory, and death. Their claims live in the uneasy borderland between speculation, technological myth, and modern folklore. But that borderland matters, not because every rumor is true, not because every mystery hides a grand design. It matters because human beings have always used mystery to ask what knowledge costs, who owns discovery, and why some ideas frighten us before we understand them. These are not stories about certainty. They are stories about longing, the longing to outlive the body, to speak without words, to heal what time breaks, to cross into other worlds or rewrite the rules of this one. Beneath the strange inventions and missing files is something familiar, the old human dream of becoming more than we are, and the old human fear that we may not be wise enough to hold what we find. So we begin not with accusation, but with a question. If the future arrived quietly, in the hands of one person working late beneath fluorescent light, would we recognize it as a gift, a danger, or simply another story we were not ready to believe? What if reality were not a stage, but a conversation? The story begins in a laboratory beneath the Alps, where machines listen for particles too small for the imagination to hold. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a physicist associated with consciousness studies, was said to be searching for something even more elusive than matter, the role of the observer. Her work, according to the legend, suggested that consciousness did not merely witness the universe, it helped shape it. The old quantum puzzle of measurement became, in her hands, something larger and more unsettling. If observation influenced what appeared, then perhaps reality was less like stone and more like water, disturbed by every gaze that fell upon it. In the story, Rodriguez studied countless measurements and found tiny variations linked not to instruments, but to expectation. Different researchers, holding different assumptions, seemed to coax different results from the same experiments. It was an idea both beautiful and dangerous, the universe as a mirror polished by collective belief. Then came the locked room. She was said to enter a CERN laboratory and never leave. Notes remained. Equations stopped mid-thought. Servers were emptied. The official explanation was ordinary. The atmosphere around the tale was not. Whether understood as science fiction, rumor, or metaphor, the question lingers. If the world we know is partly made by the minds that meet it, then truth is not weakened. It becomes more intimate. And perhaps the greatest mystery is not what matter is, but what kind of attention we bring to it. What if aging were not a sentence, but an instruction? In another version of the future, a Harvard laboratory glows through a cold September night. Inside, Dr. Sarah Chen is said to have studied the body's slow surrender to time. Telomeres, chromosomes, cellular repair, dormant genes. These were not merely biological terms in her story. They were doors. The tale says Chen found a master switch hidden in the machinery of aging. Not a fountain of youth, not a miracle, but a program written deep inside the cell. In mice, the old became young again. In whispered accounts of private human trials, age-worn tissues recovered the vitality of early adulthood. To hear such a claim is to feel two emotions at once. Hope arrives first. Imagine parents restored, diseases delayed, decades returned with their brightness intact. Imagine medicine no longer managing decline but reversing it, turning the body back toward renewal. Then unease follows. Who would receive such a treatment? Who would pay? Would a longer life make us wiser, or only extend our unfinished conflicts? Would time, once scarce, lose its power to teach tenderness? Chen's disappearance, as the story tells it, occurred just before public announcement. The lab was sealed, Materials vanished. The university's account was restrained. The legend became anything but. Yet the human truth beneath it is clear. We do not fear death only because life ends. We fear leaving before love is complete. If aging could be rewritten, we would still face the harder question: what kind of life deserves more time? What if the mind had rooms we had never learned to enter? Dr. Marcus Webb's story unfolds at Stanford, where the quiet architecture of neuroscience meets the old mystery of human potential. He was said to study savants, people whose brains, through injury or difference, reveal sudden islands of astonishing ability. In the mythology surrounding Webb, these gifts were not accidents. They were patterns, frequencies, hidden arrangements of the brain's electrical weather. By using precise electromagnetic stimulation, he supposedly awakened abilities that ordinary consciousness keeps sealed away. Memory sharpened, numbers unfolded effortlessly. Emotional perception deepened until it seemed almost telepathic. In the more extravagant versions, subjects could sense thoughts not as words, but as pressure, color, and feeling. The temptation of such a discovery is obvious. Who would not want a clearer mind? Who would not want to read deception, understand pain, or touch another person's inner life without the clumsy bridge of language? But the story wisely contains its own shadow. A mind made more powerful is not automatically made more compassionate. Intelligence without humility can become a blade. Perception without consent can become intrusion. A society of enhanced minds might be freer or more divided than ever. Webb was said to disappear after refusing to hand over his work. His equipment was removed. His notes dissolved into rumor. And still the question remains, softly troubling. If hidden capacities exist within us, perhaps the real challenge is not unlocking them. Perhaps it is becoming gentle enough to deserve them. What if gravity were less a prison than a language? In Tokyo, the story says, Dr. Yuki Tanaka watched objects rise from a table as if the earth had briefly forgotten its claim upon them. The image is almost childlike. A small device, a silent room, a metal sphere hovering in impossible stillness. Tanaka's alleged research joined gravity and electromagnetism in ways conventional theory did not permit. She was said to have created fields where weight diminished, reversed, or bent sideways. Instruments trembled. Witnesses doubted their own eyes. The familiar downward pull of life became negotiable. Few forces feel more absolute than gravity. It is the hand on the shoulder of every body, every building, every ocean tide. To imagine changing it is to imagine a civilization remade. Aircraft without fuel-heavy struggle. Spacecraft rising without flame. Cities designed without the tyranny of weight. Energy drawn from gradients older than the planet itself. And yet every liberation brings new responsibility. A technology that lifts could also destroy. A discovery that frees movement could widen power. The dream of escaping gravity quickly becomes a question of who gets to leave the ground first. Tanaka's story ends before its promised demonstration. Visitors arrive. Cameras fail. The apparatus is gone. So is she. Maybe the tale is less about anti-gravity than about human restlessness. We have always looked upward and called it destiny. But perhaps the deeper question is whether we can rise without forgetting the fragile world beneath our feet. What if thought were not private by nature, but only by distance? Dr. Robert Hayes, in The Legend, did not treat telepathy as magic. He treated it as signal. At Johns Hopkins, he was said to have studied the faint electromagnetic traces of the brain, asking whether thought might leave ripples beyond the skull. His experiments imagined two people in separate shielded rooms. One saw an image. One heard a sound. Between them, machines translated neural activity into a broadcast delicate enough to feel like intuition. The second person received fragments, a blue shape, a remembered song, a sudden sadness that was not their own. The claim is extraordinary. The ethical tension is immediate. Human privacy is more than a legal right. It is a sanctuary. We depend on the hiddenness of thought to rehearse forgiveness, doubt, desire, and fear before the world sees us. If machines could read or transmit inner life, they might create new forms of empathy. They might also end solitude as we know it. Hayes reportedly understood this. Near the end, the story says, he became uncertain. He worried that a tool for connection could become an instrument of surveillance. A bridge between minds could become a net. Then he vanished on an ordinary evening, leaving behind the most haunting absence of all, an unanswered thought. Perhaps the dream of mind-to-mind communication reveals something tender. We want to be known completely. We also need the mercy of remaining partly unknown. What if the past were not a sealed room, but a door that sometimes moved? At MIT, Dr. Lisa Morrison was said to follow the strange implications of quantum experiments where future measurements appear to alter the meaning of earlier events. In physics, such ideas are handled carefully. In legend, they bloom into time travel. Morrison's version was not a machine of brass dials and spinning clocks. It was consciousness projected through information. Not the body stepping backward, but awareness reaching across time like a hand through dark water. Her supposed experiments involved random number generators, entanglement, and intention. Records changed after the fact. Outcomes aligned with later decisions. Her notebooks, the story says, contained predictions that seemed impossible to possess beforehand. The power imagined here is immense. If the past could be influenced, grief itself would become negotiable. Accidents might be softened before they occurred. Illness might be interrupted at its first invisible moment. History could become editable, a manuscript revised by those who inherit its consequences. But there is danger in that wish. The past is painful, but it is also shared ground. If every generation could rewrite what came before, memory would lose its authority. Responsibility might dissolve. The wound would disappear, but so might the lesson. Morrison's tale ends with warnings from possible futures and an empty laboratory cleared in the night. Whatever its factual status, the story touches an ache older than science. All of us have moments we would return to. The harder wisdom is learning how to live after the door has closed. What if the unused parts of DNA were not silence, but unread music? Dr. Kevin Park's story begins with the so-called non-coding regions of the genome, the long sequences once casually dismissed as biological excess. In his legend, this was not junk. It was software. He was said to find patterns resembling instructions, hidden regulatory systems that shaped intelligence, emotion, perception, and perhaps capacities still unnamed. By rewriting parts of this genetic language, Park supposedly helped volunteers develop sharper memory, calmer emotions, heightened senses, and forms of pattern recognition that felt almost prophetic. The metaphor is powerful because DNA already feels like destiny. It is the script we inherit before we can speak. To edit it is to challenge the boundary between nature and choice. A world of genetic enhancement might heal inherited disease and expand human ability. It might also create new hierarchies disguised as progress. Park's private fear, according to the story, was not that enhancement would fail. It was that it would succeed unevenly. The wealthy improved, the vulnerable left behind. Humanity divided not by culture or opportunity, but by access to upgraded biology. Then, as with the others, his record fractures. A night in the lab. A claimed job offer. Databases emptied before the public could examine the work. The tale does not need to be literal to be meaningful. Every technology that promises human improvement carries a mirror. It asks whether we seek to become better for one another or merely superior to one another. What if somewhere, just beside us, another Earth had learned from our mistakes? Dr. Ahmed Hassan's story carries the cold beauty of a winter night at Cambridge. Quantum theory opens the philosophical possibility of branching worlds, realities where different outcomes unfold. Hassan, in the legend, built a way to look through. At first, the openings were microscopic, a shimmer, a measurement anomaly, a glimpse of another laboratory almost identical to his own. Then the portals widened, and the tale grew stranger. Objects crossed. Messages arrived from alternate versions of Hassan. Parallel researchers compared notes across the borders of reality. Some worlds were wounded. There were Earths scarred by war, disease, ecological collapse. But others appeared wiser, cleaner, more advanced. They had solved problems still burning in ours. They held technologies we had only dreamed of, and histories in which catastrophe had been avoided by different choices. This is the true emotional force of the multiverse story. Not escape, comparison. To imagine parallel worlds is to confront the consequences of decision. Every road not taken becomes a civilization. Every delay, every act of courage, every failure of imagination may branch into lives we will never see. Hassan's final experiment, they say, aimed at a human-sized gateway. A flash overwhelmed the cameras. When the light settled, he was gone. Perhaps the haunting question is not whether other worlds exist. Perhaps it is whether this one, flawed and luminous, is still capable of becoming the better version we keep imagining elsewhere. What if death were not an ending, but a change in signal? Dr. Maria Santos's story is quieter than the others, and for that reason, more affecting. At Stanford, she was said to study near-death experiences not as superstition, but as data. What happens to consciousness when the brain falls silent? Is the mind produced by the body or received through it? Her alleged equipment measured electromagnetic patterns around patients in clinical death. The tale says organized information persisted after brain activity had ceased. Personality, memory, intention, faint but coherent, like radio from a distant storm. From there, Santos supposedly developed a way to communicate. Simple messages at first, then longer exchanges. The dead, in these accounts, described existence not as clouds or judgment, but as a mode of consciousness less bound by distance, less burdened by physical form. Families could one day speak across the threshold. Knowledge might pass from generations no longer living. Such a possibility is both comforting and destabilizing. Human culture is built around mourning. We learn to love under the shadow of impermanence. If death became permeable, grief might soften, but so might urgency. Would we cherish one another more, or postpone love because goodbye was no longer final? Santos vanished before presenting her work. Devices were removed, recordings disappeared. What remained was the ache of the question. Maybe every age creates stories like hers because loss demands language. We do not only want proof of survival, we want assurance that love, once given, is not erased by silence. What if the universe were not made of things but instructions? Dr. James Wright's story belongs to the digital age. At MIT, he was said to see quantum mechanics through the lens of computation. Superposition became processing. Collapse became execution. Physical law became code running beneath appearances. In this account, Wright discovered ways to access what he called reality's source layer, not metaphorically, but operationally. By combining quantum systems with consciousness interfaces, he supposedly altered local physical constants. Light behaved differently. Gravity shifted. Matter obeyed temporary rules written by human intention. It is an intoxicating idea. The world as editable text. Physics as an operating system. Consciousness as a user with permissions it never knew it possessed. But the story understands the moral abyss beneath the wonder. A programmable reality would make every boundary unstable. Healing and creation would become possible on a scale beyond imagination. So would domination. If one mind could rewrite local law, what protects the rest of us from someone else's vision of perfection? Wright, like several figures in these accounts, reportedly hesitated. The day before a demonstration, he questioned whether civilization could survive tools that turned desire into physics. Then came corrupted footage, a sanitized laboratory, and a disappearance explained only in official abstractions. As metaphor, the story is almost too precise for our time. We already live among algorithms that shape perception, memory, and choice. Perhaps reality programming begins not with gravity, but with attention. The first world we edit is the one inside the mind. Why do stories of missing scientists return again and again? Across these accounts, the pattern is familiar. A lone researcher makes a discovery that exceeds accepted boundaries. A demonstration approaches. Visitors arrive. Files disappear. Institutions offer calm explanations that satisfy procedure, but not imagination. It is easy to turn such patterns into suspicion. It is harder, and more useful, to ask why they move us so deeply. Part of the answer is trust. Modern life depends on invisible systems: laboratories, agencies, corporations, universities, servers, archives. We cannot personally verify most of what governs us. We rely on institutions to protect knowledge and share it responsibly. When stories suggest that knowledge can vanish, they touch a public fear that discovery may not belong to the public at all. Another part is grief for unrealized futures. Every missing breakthrough represents a road not taken, a cure delayed, a technology withheld, a conversation humanity never had with itself. These stories become vessels for our frustration with slow progress and uneven access to the benefits of science. But there is also humility here. True discovery is rarely clean. It moves through uncertainty, failed replication, ethical review, and doubt. A claim can be fascinating without being established. Wonder does not require surrendering judgment. So the recurring image of the vanished scientist may be less a report than a warning, not only against secrecy, but against impatience, against our desire for miracles without consequences, against the belief that knowledge once found automatically makes us wise. What do we owe to ideas that might change everything? The 10 stories, taken together, form a map of human longing. We want reality to listen. We want bodies to renew. We want minds to connect, gravity to loosen, time to forgive, DNA to blossom, parallel worlds to advise us, death to answer, and the universe itself to open its code. These desires are not foolish. They are evidence of our tenderness. We suffer because life is finite, bodies fail, communication breaks, and history cannot be undone. Science begins in that same place of discomfort. It asks whether the limits we inherited are final or merely waiting to be understood. Yet the stories also remind us that every threshold requires character. A longer life asks for deeper purpose. A stronger mind asks for greater compassion. A doorway to another world asks for care toward this one. Power over reality asks for restraint. The future is never only a technical problem. It is a moral atmosphere. That is why the calmest reading of these mysteries may also be the most demanding. We do not need to believe every claim to be changed by the questions. We only need to notice what they reveal about us: our hunger for transcendence, our fear of control, our suspicion of silence, and our hope that somewhere beyond present knowledge, a gentler world is possible. The missing scientist becomes a figure of imagination, a person walking ahead with a lantern, while the rest of us argue about whether the light is real. In the end, these stories are not simply about disappearance. They are about the fragile path between discovery and meaning. A laboratory can produce data, but society must decide what to do with it. A formula can open a door, but human beings must choose whether to enter carefully, selfishly, or not at all. The figures in these accounts may be read as characters in a modern mythology of science. Each carries a gift too large for the world around them. Consciousness that shapes matter, biology that reverses age, minds that speak silently, gravity made pliable, time made porous, genes made editable, dimensions made reachable, death made conversational, reality made programmable. Their vanishings, whether literal claims or symbolic endings, leave the same silence. Into that silence, we project our deepest questions. Who controls knowledge? What should remain unknown until we are ready? Can truth be dangerous? Can secrecy ever protect humanity without diminishing it? And if a discovery could transform the world, would we recognize the difference between caution and fear? A mature wonder does not demand easy answers. It allows mystery to breathe without turning it into certainty. It honors science by respecting evidence, and honors imagination by listening to what our impossible stories are trying to say. Perhaps the future will not arrive as a thunderclap. Perhaps it will come quietly, through patient work, careful ethics, and minds brave enough to doubt themselves. And perhaps the greatest discovery ahead is not how to conquer time, death, gravity, or reality. Perhaps it is learning how to carry knowledge with enough humility that, when the next door opens, we are worthy of walking through together.